Hi, folks. I'm Salim Ismail. Thank you very much for having me at this conference. I think it's one of the most important topics in the world today as to how do we think about the future of democracy. So hopefully you can see my screen. I want to talk you through an idea I have called micro-democracy. First, let me highlight what I think are the fundamental issues with where we are. But before that, a little bit about me. I'm from India originally. I come from a diplomatic family. Schooling in university in Canada. I spent 10 years in Europe, living in several countries there, and last 20 years in the US. So I'm quite confused. Really, my journey starts when I was the head of innovation at Yahoo. Learned a fundamental lesson: when you attempt disruptive innovation in a legacy environment, the immune system attacks you. All of our organizations and our institutions have this backlash against new ideas. And I was fascinated by the fact that Yahoo was such a young company, yet had this problem. I went from that to helping found and build out Singularity University. Then I wrote this book called Exponential Organizations, and I now serve on the board of the XPRIZE Foundation, also along with our ecosystem that we built. I want to fundamentally illustrate that we have a fundamental breakdown in democracy. I think I've been looking at this for about 10, 12 years now, and I just don't see how we can keep traditional democracies the way they are. Obviously, Winston Churchill said it was the worst form of government except for everything else, but the current structures don't work. I want to talk about why that's the case and what can we do to fix it. So I believe that technology is a massive forcing function, and I'll explain why. I believe that that's breaking all of our institutions. Our current leaders clearly aren't trained for this, and most of the action and certainly implementation is happening at a very local or city level. And let me support each of those. Via technology, we're actually dropping drastically the cost of goods and services. Here's the cost of light over a 700-year period. The cost of sequencing DNA is moving at 5 times the pace of Moore's law. Here's the cost of solar power, which has dropped 150 times in the last few decades. And so this is a profound phenomenon where technology is deflationary to a massive level. The blockchain is open source and free. Today, we have a dozen technologies that are all accelerating in a very dramatic way. And this is very exciting at a number of levels. The challenge that we have is that this is disrupting and breaking all of the institutions by which we run the world. And our current pace of change can't support this. Let me cover a couple of these just so I make the point. If you take most of our traditional institutions, they were designed even a few hundred years ago in a world that was local and linear, and not designed for what's happening today. Take education. All of our educational systems are designed to take a young child, train them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Small problem, we don't know what a job looks like in the future, especially after Corona. What are we teaching them, right? Or take democracy. We invented representative democracy that most of our countries use. That was invented a few hundred years ago. And back then, if you were, say, in Washington, D.C., you literally had no idea what was happening in California because the speed of horse was as fast as you could find out. And let's note that Parliament in many countries, or Congress, meets occasionally to give people time to cross the country and say, here's what my people are thinking. Except today we have an abundance of information that gets misused, misinterpreted, faked, and every major democracy in the world is broken. India, where I'm from, originally broken, Brazil broken, the UK broke a few years ago, the US breaking right in front of our eyes, right? So I'll argue that the metabolism of democracy moves too slowly for the pace of change. Democracies tend to make the right decision, but they take a long time to get there. Like women's rights or voting rights or equality, etc. But you have to bring the whole population along, so that takes time. We're living in an era where we don't have time. We have to make very fast decisions. Note that both during the economic crises in Europe and the US, all power was handed to a technocrat, hoping they would make the right decision. And I could go on across the board around our other institutions. The UN Security Council was set up to mitigate conflicts between states. Today, 80% of armed conflicts are civil wars, and the UN Security Council has nothing to say about that. And how do you update these institutions is a fundamental question, and we've been looking at that very carefully. Maybe the most lighthearted and best example of a breakdown in institutions is marriage. We invented marriage as a social institution about 9,000 years ago. And when that first appeared as an institution, average lifespan 10,000 years ago was about 23 years old. So back then you got married and you had kids and you died. Marriage is not supposed to last 50, 60 years. We worry about the divorce rate. My wife calls it state-sanctioned torture. But we're living with an institution that was set up for a time that's completely outdated now. And I could argue that many of these are like that today. So our current institutions don't fit for the world that's coming. The challenge is that in a democracy, those are very difficult to update. Democracies are good at maintaining the status quo, not good at structural change. And note that most democracies devolve to a short-term, high metabolism election cycle. Very few people are looking at the longer-term needs of the country and can't cope with it. Right? In the U.S., the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, has basically vanished. You do not have constitutional protection of privacy in the U.S. today. A fundamental pillar of American society has disappeared with no public conversation about it. Right? Now, I'm Canadian, so it doesn't matter for me anyway, but if you're American, this is kind of an unpleasant place to be, notwithstanding the current politics. We're pepper spraying our civics in many countries because in a time of uncertainty driven by technological change, we go with authoritarian regimes because we feel comfort in the authority that a populist leader can bring. We've been dealing with this. We wrote a book that talks about how to think about the future of organizations, both private sector and public sector. And we have a global community of consultants that are trained in future techniques. We think all new organizations need to be purpose-driven, scalable, adaptable, and agile. And we have been building and architecting organizations. Maybe the biggest tools that we've been working on and have solved is solving this immune system problem. And we've done it in private sector with Procter & Gamble and others, but we've also done it in the public sector. We've developed and open sourced a 16-week process where we can take a public sector environment and completely transform it. We've worked with the mayor of Miami, the Supreme Court in Colombia, and done that about 7 times. So that's our work that we do with our ecosystem. I want to touch, though, on the fact that the fundamental paradigm that's happening in the world is that we're moving the world from scarcity to abundance. And this is part of the challenge. You know, think about the idea that every business in the world is essentially selling scarcity. As we move to abundance of, say, music, the music industry is a good one. You know, let's go back 20 years ago. We had 6 or 8 music studios, major global music studios, selling scarcity, selling music as a scarcity, selling it as a product. So you would buy a cassette or a CD or a DVD and you would pay for that product. Then we digitized music. And now essentially all those major music studios have disappeared. And now we have 2 platforms, iTunes and Spotify, delivering abundance. So it turns out when you digitize, you go from scarcity to abundance. And we've seen that in books and newspapers and music, etc. But now we're moving to cars and energy and water and other areas, which is a very profound and exciting stage to be in. This requires a completely new look at how we organize ourselves as a global society and how do we solve some of our global SDGs, be it energy, prosperity, clean water, and so on. I want to highlight a couple of these just to really make the point. As I said, I'm on the board of the XPRIZE. We offered this prize 3 years ago. And the prize was, can you create a machine that will extract clean water out of the atmosphere? And the parameters were you had to be able to extract 2,000 liters a day using only renewable energy at a cost of less than 2 cents a liter. Okay, so 2,000 liters a day was calculated because that's enough for a village or a large apartment building. And that's enough there. If you can generate that for 2 cents a liter, you have a very powerful solution. We typically design prizes to be done in about 6-7 years, but 2.5 years in, a team pops up and says we've done it, and we awarded the prize. So we now have a machine that can extract clean water out of the atmosphere almost anywhere in the world, and so therefore we can have abundant water, okay? Because we live on a water planet. And so Think about India running out of water, or Cape Town, or South Africa, or many parts of the world. This essentially can solve that problem pretty powerfully. And 2 cents a liter, I think we would all agree, is very powerful. So there's clean water. I showed you earlier the graphs of solar energy. We will, in 10 years, we will have enough energy via solar to power the entire world. Okay, and this is because solar is on a doubling pattern, doubling roughly every 2 years, and this is profoundly exciting. Chile today is generating so much solar power, they're giving it to their neighbors for free. The coal museum in Kentucky is actually using solar panels on its roof, which is a little ironic, shall we say. And so we're moving to energy abundance and water abundance. We have vertical farms, which will provide food abundance very shortly. And so via technology, we're delivering massive abundance through all sorts of interesting mechanisms. I'll highlight this last one just to really kind of showcase how dramatically we're moving the world forward. This is a company out of Miami called Wellways that has developed an 8-inch diameter pad, and you can see the dots there. Those are very sensitive temperature measurements. So a woman would put this on left and right side of her chest, wear it for 10 minutes, take a picture of the barcode and upload it. This device turns out to be 80% better than at detecting breast cancer than a mammogram. Without any radiation, you can do it at home. Costs about $20 or $30, and it's FDA approved. It's fully, completely proven. So we can essentially eradicate breast cancer now by giving this to every woman in the world, right? And so this water, healthcare, etc. We have energy. We have profound opportunities to move the world from scarcity to abundance. The challenge is this means that we have to implement and transform our institutions. And I would argue that our current government's mechanisms and structures are not good at structural change. And this is the enormous challenge. I'm going to argue that what we need to do is dissolve major nation states into micro-democracies or cities or city-states, okay? If you think about big countries, they were very useful for the last few hundred years because you had abundance of natural resources, you had critical mass in multiple industries, you could throw your weight around in the region. Today, every major country in the world is a mess. China, Russia, India, Brazil, the US, all a mess. All the advantages sit with the small countries that can be more agile, can move more quickly, can manage their communities, get information out there more reliably. Look at Corona. The smaller countries have been generally much more successful. All the large countries are a mess. And so it's much easier to manage our world in a smaller environment. There's a number of reasons for this. A big country, as I said, is slower to move. You have to bring the entire population along. The US is literally breaking 40% of the country doesn't live in reality, and therefore they are structurally broken for a generation or so. So at a smaller city-state level, in a city, everybody kind of knows where they fit. If you think about our biggest cities in the world, Shanghai, Tokyo, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, those are bigger and more complex than almost any country was 100 years ago, right? And so that's self-contained in a sense. And if you deliver solar energy, vertical farming, water abundance, you essentially free that small environment and you don't need country-level infrastructure in the same way. Excuse me. So we have a profound opportunity to transform our democracies and move them, but it'll happen via smaller environments. The reason we've been working on this immune system problem is that if we can solve that immune system problem, then new breakthroughs like blockchain, AI, sensors, etc., can easily be implemented. Today, the minute you try and propose some dramatic new idea, you're fighting against the politics. You have bankers fighting Bitcoin, taxis fighting Uber, etc. So our community and ecosystem for the last 5 years has focused on solving this immune system problem because we think that's the hidden problem of stopping society from progressing. And so what we think as we move to, say, energy abundance and food abundance, then and water abundance, we don't have to fight about anything. So cities can naturally coexist. They don't have to conquer more and more territory because they're self-sufficient in reason and go down that path. Cities tend not to compete with each other except for tourism, which Corona has killed anyway. And so I'll argue that our major democracies in the world, our nation states, need to be de-emphasized, and that's happening. And we're moving the world towards a much more smaller city-state, and a collection of those will manage the world better going forward because we can make decisions faster. And maybe that's the biggest reason, is that in a big democracy, it takes a long time to make a decision, whereas smaller democracies can make decisions much more quickly, and they're much more agile and nimble. And so we're very clear that that's where we think the world will go. And the reason that we think this is so critical is we think that this next 10 or 20 years is a fundamentally large inflection point in the world. We think the next couple of decades will dictate the next 500 years of humanity. And where are we overall? I think, many of you are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, where technology takes off. We have inflated expectations. You have the trough of disillusionment, and then it becomes much better, but nobody notices because we trashed it when it first came along. And that's called the Gartner hype cycle for technologies. I would argue that through the Industrial Revolution, Western society has kind of grown and expanded and conquered the world. And we're kind of on a downturn now. And we are going into a major trough where we're moving our systems and our infrastructures and our institutions from scarcity to abundance. And basically, as leaders, we need to figure out new leaders and new projects to minimize the amplitude and wavelength of that trough. And that's the work that we have to do today. When I look back in history, and you talk to the let's notice that every major civilization in the past, the Romans, the Incas, the Mayans, got to a very complex and very sophisticated state, and then they hit a boundary condition and suddenly collapsed, right? And we are in that. If you talk to the Yuval Hararis and Niall Fergusons of the world, we're kind of in that state now, and so we have to very carefully manage this next couple of decades. Because we fundamentally have a choice as a global species. We have two paths in front of us. We have either a Star Trek path, where abundance gives us peace, and the thesis behind Star Trek is infinite diversity, infinite creativity. And you have the Maslow's hierarchy is largely fulfilled, and we mostly live in a self-actualized world. Or we're heading towards a Mad Max path, where we're driven by tribal and scarcity and etc. I would argue that today the default is a Mad Max path, and we as leaders have to figure out how to tilt that future to that Star Trek path. From a technology perspective, we are already there, and it is very, very possible. Right? But from a political, institutional, emotional, social environment, we are not there, and we have to move that way. And the way to do it is micro democracies and small democracies that allow us to move forward. And as I said, because we can now solve that immune system problem, we can quickly implement the breast cancer detection idea or the clean water idea. And so that's my basic thesis around democracy. My family was very involved in the independence movement in India. And, it's great that it's a democracy, but in 60 years, no infrastructure has been laid down. And so we need to figure out how to structurally update this world. And as I said, our ecosystem is working on both the tool sets, but also quests for what our new institutions could look like. And so we have a lot of work to do. I'm so thrilled that you put this conference together. I'm again Salim Ismail from OpenEXO. Come join our community at openexo.com, and looking forward to connecting with you further. Thanks again.